We have many of our founders are here today. I'm so proud to welcome them here. And I'm hoping that they will join us and share some of their stories of the beginnings of our chapter. But first, I wanted to recognize a very special founder, and that is Fred Hecklinger and his passing. And so if we could have a moment of silence for Fred. I have Bobby here, and she's asked to say a few words.
Thank you, Commodore. Actually, John Masefield wants to say a few words. And this poem is a little bit more obscure than some of the others of which we are familiar. It's called Port of Many Ships. It was one of Fred's favorites. I've heard it read once. I think you'll see that it speaks to Fred. It's a sunny, pleasant anchorage is kingdom come, where crews is always laying aft for double tots of rum. And there's dancing and fiddling of every kind of sort. It's a fine place for sailor men, is that there port. And I wish. The winds is never nothing more than just light airs, and no one gets belaying pinned, and no one ever swears. You're free to loaf and laze around, your pipe between your lips, lolling on the forecastle, sonny, looking at the ships. And I wish. For riding in the anchorage, the ships of all the world have got one anchor down and all the sails are furled. All the sunken hookers and the crews as took and died, they lay there merry, sonny, swinging to the tide. And I wish. Drowned old wooden hookers, green with dripping wrack, ships as never fetched to port, as never came back. Swinging to the blushing tide, dipping to the swell, and the crews all singing, sonny, beating on the bell. And I wish, and I'm there. Thank you, Mr. Masefield. And the Eastport Yacht Club was very important to Fred. Big part of his life. Huge creative effort. And thank you all.
So we are here to celebrate Fred, to celebrate our founders, and also to celebrate the last 40 years and kick us off for the next 40 years. We're going to leave the microphone open, and I invite you to come up with your favorite memory of EYC, your favorite memory of Fred. This is your chance. We are recording this, and so we will have it for the future and to share it with other people. So thank you all so much. We're going to cut some cake, and there may be some rum shots going around. So thank you for being here.
I won't be long, but I do want to salute Fred. He mentored and encouraged many people in this club. He was truly the gentleman sailor. And I appreciate everything he did for me and for this club. Rest in peace, Fred. We love you.
Who's that man behind the mask? I'm Jeff Goldring. I'm one of the founders, and I have a small presentation to make to the Eastport Yacht Club, and if Liz would come up to accept this. Liz, this is an original 1980 Virgin from the club. It was made by Nancy Nussbaum at the Navy Sail Loft. And this flew from all of my boats. I retired it this spring. And I put together a little certificate that gives the history of the Burgee, who did what to who. And this goes with it.
Hey, good afternoon. It's great to see everybody. I'm Ivan Paul, and if you don't know me, also one of the founders. And just one of the things that I think is it's really tragic for us is the passing of Fred Hecklinger, and he is going to be sorely, sorely missed by those of us who have known him forever. And you know, Fred was one of a kind, and there's the first time I ever met Fred was 1977, and I came here from Michigan to buy a boat, and I bought a 35-foot Olsen yawl, which was a Swedish-built wooden boat, and she was bright from the gunnels up, and she had coamings were about 18 inches wide, and she had enough, you know, it was about 1.5 gallons of varnish to do one coat. And anyways, after Fred finished surveying the boat, and I said, well, Fred, what do you think about this boat? And in typical Fred speak, he said, well, if the vessel is used for the purpose for which she was intended, and in no other way, she should be a fine vessel and should serve you well. And I said, fine, but what do you think about the boat? And he looked at all that varnish and he said, there is nothing wrong with this vessel that a couple of gallons of white paint wouldn't fix. And so that kind of was my first exposure to Fred. And then some years later, actually after I took the boat, I bought it, sailed it back to Michigan, sailed it back here, and I've been here ever since. But at any rate, I bought a Pinky schooner, a 21-foot Pinky schooner that was up on the Magathie. And it was a spritzel rig boat, 2 masts. And we had to bring it back to Annapolis. So Fred said, well, sure, I'd be happy to come over. It's a traditional boat. And so, and it had no engine. So we were sailing the boat back from the Magathie, and the wind died completely. And I had a pair of what I called oars, and Fred quickly corrected me and said, those are not oars, they're sweeps. Because there was a ratio, which I don't recall, of how the length of the oar compared to the length of the boat. And he said, this is a sweep. And I said, fine. And then, so we started to row this boat. And then Fred said, well, you know, the truth is in the day when this boat was sailed, you didn't use oars, you sculled. And I said, oh, really? Well, I had no idea how to scull. Well, Fred went about fixing up some thole pins in the back of the boat, and then we turned around and used one of the oars, and we sculled that boat from pretty much the mouth of the Severn River all the way to my house on Thomas Point at the time, with occasionally a little bit of sailing. But, you know, Fred was not one to allow anyone to disrupt tradition. If it was tradition, that's how we were going to go. And my last Fred story was Mike Kaufman used to have an oyster party at his house out in St. John's, Cape St. John. And it was a huge party. Everybody went. It was during boat show, and everybody looked forward to it. So we went out there, and this was about 79, I guess. I'd been here for 1 or 2 years. And some friends of mine from Michigan came out. And I said, well, great. I said, you here for the boat show? I'll take you out to the oyster party. You'll have a blast. Well, one of the guys, Denny Van Stee, looked at me at some point during this party as we were eating oysters. And he said, how do oysters reproduce? How do they have sex? I said, Denny, I don't have a clue. I said, but I know somebody that will probably be able to tell you. So I took him over and I introduced him to Fred. And I said, Fred, Denny here would like to know how oysters reproduce. He said, funny you should ask. I went, uh-oh. He said, I just finished a paper on the reproductive cycle of the Chesapeake Bay bivalve. Whereupon I left Denny Van Stee standing there with Fred. About 20 minutes later, I walked by and Denny was standing there, eyes glazed over, totally unbelievable. Like he couldn't move, he couldn't get in, couldn't get out. And Fred was still talking about oysters having sex. But that was the man that Fred was. And above all, Fred was a friend. He was a dear friend. He was loyal and true. And I miss him dearly. And I'm so, so sorry to see him pass. Thank you.
Okay. Is this on? Okay. Hello all, I'm Carol Goldring. I guess you would consider me a founderess, and I wanted to share some stories about Fred. I had the good fortune to meet Fred in, I believe it was 72, and I hitched a ride sailing back from Nassau to Fort Lauderdale after the SORC. And I hitched a ride with Fred on Bandit. And that was my first introduction to Fred. And it was a phenomenal sail. The weather was perfect. The boat was spectacular. And Fred was an amazing seaman and a great shipmate. And I still cherish memories from that trip. Fred, in normal Fred captain fashion, put on a full burial at sea during our crossing. We laid to rest his old topsiders with all the proper words. Anyway, it was quite an ordeal and quite fun. And also during that time on that sail, Fred taught me how to tie a bowline. And I can still do it in about a flash and a half because I do it the way Fred taught me. Now, I don't do it behind my back like he did, but I can still tie a bowline in any situation. And I thank Fred for that as well. Also on that cruise, again, the weather was beautiful, the stars were spectacular, and all of us on the boat sat out on deck and shared our stories of the stars, the constellations, the myths that went with them in Greek and Roman and all the rest, and great memories, great memories. That was my introduction to Fred. And then when we moved to Annapolis, we had the good fortune to connect with Fred and Bobby and have been dear friends ever since. And Jeff and I have always valued their friendship, their love, and their warmth. And we miss Fred dearly.
Okay, folks, I had to come back mainly for one reason is that because Fred is not here. And I was sitting there in the other room looking at this photograph or this video of an idle microphone. And I know that Fred would never have allowed a microphone to stand idle when he had an opportunity to have a few things to say. So what I'd really like to do is very briefly talk about the Eastport Yacht Club and the founding of the Eastport Yacht Club, how we came to be and why we came to be. And I'll keep it as brief as I can. But as most of you know, this started off in the offices of Kaufman and Ladd with a happy hour that we had together. It was 11 of us. And we had our happy hour every Friday night. And at one point, someone said we should start a yacht club. Well, that conversation went on for a couple of years. And then finally one night, Mike Kaufman said, let's stop talking and let's do it. That was after a considerable amount of rum, and we decided that that was going to be our goal. That was in the spring of 1980. And we commenced to meet about every 2 weeks, not on our Friday night happy hours, but on Thursday nights. And the very first point of order, as Fred would always bring up in the general membership meetings, was we would open a quart of Mount Gay rum, throw the cork out the window, and continue with the meeting. And the meeting could not be adjourned until the bottle of rum was empty. So we set about saying we have to come up with some purposes and some objectives, and talked about why we wanted to have a different yacht club. And the reason was that the other clubs in town, of which I will make no mention, were very exclusive clubs. And we elected that we wanted to have a club that was inclusive of all people. The initial requirements for membership in Eastport Yacht Club were that you be alive, over the age of 18, and breathing, and of good character. And at some point, someone objected to the idea of the good character thing. So we came up with an alternative that said you must be of a reasonable character, which then allowed the rest of us to stay. Otherwise, a few of us would have had to leave. But from that point on, we met every other Thursday for about 4 or 5 months, going through trying to establish bylaws and what we wanted this club to be. And we first off did not want it to be a stuffy club. We did not want it to be a club that excluded any members, potential members, unless they were beyond reasonable characters. And we had a few of those showed up. But we initially then set out, we had the initial meeting at Marmaduke's upstairs. And by the way, that is the only meeting the Eastport Yacht Club ever had at Marmaduke's. There are all kinds of rumors going around that we met at Marmaduke's for years. We never did. We drank there a lot, but we didn't meet there. When we had that initial meeting, I think we invited 175 people. And as I recall, about 125 or 35 showed up, and about 100 joined right on the spot. And we had nothing. There was nothing to offer. There wasn't even a paper club. There wasn't a clubhouse. There was nothing. But we did have within that group a profound dedication to sailing and yachting. Most of the people in that room were yachting professionals, if there is such a thing as a yachting professional. There was a different name for them in that time, but I'm not allowed to say that today. But from that point, you know, the club went on for a couple of years with just as a paper club until we finally got placed down on Carroll's Creek. And we got into Carroll's Creek, and John Bergreen, Curly, bald-headed Curly, was our Commodore at the time. And he called up a special meeting to get authorization to sign a lease to occupy the 4th floor of the building down at Carroll's Creek. And we voted almost unanimously. There were some people who wanted to remain a paper club to sign the lease, and Curly responded, "That's close. I signed the lease yesterday." So, so we had gone through a perfunctory vote. And when we started that club up there, it was an open room with nothing in it. And basically to show you the commitment of the membership, Charlie's West Side was a bar that Charlie Hiltebidle used to have over on Annapolis Street in West Annapolis. And he had just shut down the bar, and Charlie said, "You guys want anything, come and get it." So we went over and we ripped out the refrigerators, the sinks, the keg coolers, anything that we could grab, and threw them in the back of our trucks, brought them back over and installed them in Carroll's Creek. And at the same time, there was a bar upstairs at Middleton's called Charlie's Bar, and he was closing down. So we went over there and we ripped out the bar top, and that became our bar top down at 4th Street. But the point is all of that was constructed by members, and everybody just kind of put it together. I'm not quite sure. I don't recall how we managed to get by the city and the health department and everything else. But within about 3 or 4 weeks, we were up and operating as a club, and no bartenders, no staff. And it was all volunteers, volunteer bartenders, code of honor. You went over and you got a drink when nobody was there, because everybody had a key. You were supposed to write down a chit as an IOU and pay your bill when it was due. We progressed from there to getting minimal staff. I'm trying to remember, who was the blonde girl who was the first bartender? Pam. anyways, scroll pimp. So we finally got a bartender, and that went on. And Ross Glover, who's sitting right here at one point, once we got the bar up and operating, he said, well, he said, now we have a bar. There is no problem that the Eastport Yacht Club cannot drink its way out of. And you know, that's kind of held true, but the challenges that this club has gone through in the last 40 years are numerous. We've had a couple of times when literally I thought that the club was going to dissolve and disintegrate because of some of the issues that were taking place amongst various segments or factions of the membership. And we have fortunately been able to get through all of those. You know, the last one was about 5 or 6 years ago, and hopefully we haven't seen any since. And I'm just praying and hoping that all of you here will continue to put the yacht club first, the growth of it first, and want it to be here for the next 40 years, that we're having another celebration of the existence of the Eastport Yacht Club. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm one of the early members of the Eastport Yacht Club, and somebody was talking about Freddie Hecklinger, and unfortunately Freddie passed a short time ago, about 10 days ago. And they said, well, when did you? I said, well, I knew Freddie pretty well. And they said, well, how did you know Freddie? And I said, well, that was pretty easy. I was in a bar in Fort Lauderdale drinking, strangely enough. And Freddie came up to me and he said, do you want to take a trip? And I said, where to? He said, Annapolis, Maryland. And I said, sure. So he organized me to go down and stay on the boat, because at that point in time, I did not have too many available apartments. So I went down to the boat and I stayed on the boat, and then Freddie had found, I think, 2 or 3 other people. And so we left Fort Lauderdale and headed to Annapolis. And as we sailed into Annapolis, I said, well, where are we going to tie up? He said, oh, you let me worry about that. So we went through the bridge, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but he said, there's a spot over here on the right-hand side, which was Arnie Gay's place, if you remember Arnie. And so we went over there and we tied up at Arnie Gay's place and got off the boat. And we were standing on the dock, and I started to walk down the dock, and Freddie said, hang on a minute, don't move. So I stopped and I looked at Freddie, and he's looking down the dock. And at the end of the dock is this black sailboat about, I'd have to say 55 to 60 feet long. And here is this girl on her hands and knees sanding the deck. And we stood there for 5 minutes, and Freddie was very intrigued by this girl. And he turned to me and he said, you know, I'm going to marry that girl. And I said, yeah, right, Freddie. Well, we walked down the dock and we walked out and we went to a bar and we had a few drinks. And Freddie said, I'm going to go back to that boat and see how that girl was. So he did. And I don't know if you remember Bobby very well, or do you remember his wife, but his wife's name was Bobby. And she was the girl sanding on the sailboat at the end of the dock. And they got married, I think it was 5, maybe 6 years after that. And so when Bobby just passed, it was very sad because Freddie, Bobby didn't pass, Freddie passed. And it was very sad, but that was the first time that I had spent any time with, apart from sailing back on the boat, with Freddie. And he was a great guy. But anyway, I thought I should tell the story of how Bobby and Freddie got married. Anyway, thank you. Bye.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our rum toast this evening. My name is Mark Jones. I'm the Vice Commodore of EYC. It is with great honor that I remember Fred because my first remembrance of him is the annual meeting. And as Ivan said, opening a bottle of rum, throwing the cap out the window and admonishing us that we cannot leave until that bottle of rum is finished. So this rum shot is not only to 40 years of EYC and 40 more to Fred, but also I found an interesting toast and it said, here's to swearing, lying, stealing, and drinking. When you swear, swear by your country. When you lie, lie for a friend. When you steal, steal away from bad company. And when you drink, drink with me at EYC. Hear, hear. Thank you, and 40 more years, ladies and gentlemen.
you.